Blue and red lights flickered across the streets of Kenosha, reflecting off broken glass and drifting smoke. It was late summer, yet the air felt heavy, charged with tension, uncertainty, and emotion. Somewhere in the crowd, a teenager moved cautiously through the chaos, carrying a rifle and wearing medical gloves. Within minutes, that image would become one of the most debated moments in modern courtroom history. No one present that night could have predicted how quickly events would unfold or how deeply they would divide public opinion. The unrest had followed the police shooting of Jacob Blake, sparking protests that drew national attention. Demonstrators, journalists, volunteers, and bystanders all filled the streets, each with different intentions and perspectives. Among them was 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse. He later said he came to help protect property and provide first aid. Others questioned why a teenager had entered such a volatile environment at all. As the evening progressed, scattered confrontations broke out across the area. Videos recorded on phones captured fragments of movement, shouting, and confusion, pieces of a timeline investigators would later study frame by frame. Then came the moment that changed everything. A series of rapid events unfolded in a parking lot and along a nearby street. Witnesses described panic. Videos showed people running. Within seconds, multiple individuals were shot. The identities soon became central to the investigation. One was Joseph Rosenbaum. Another was Anthony Huber. Third, Gage Grosskreutz survived and would later testify in court. The incident immediately triggered intense debate across the country. Was this self-defense or a criminal act? Investigators began collecting evidence almost instantly: surveillance footage, cell phone videos, witness statements, social media posts. But one unusual detail quickly stood out. Multiple recordings captured the same sequence from different angles. Instead of a single narrative, there were several overlapping versions of what had happened, and they didn't all tell the same story. Within hours, Kyle Rittenhouse turned himself into authorities. The legal process began. But as detectives worked to reconstruct the timeline, one critical question remained unanswered: who initiated the chain of events that led to the shootings? The answer would determine everything. And the deeper investigators looked into the footage, the more complicated the timeline became. The case was no longer just about what happened that night. It was about interpretation, perspective, and the thin line between fear and intent. What investigators discovered next would shape one of the most closely watched trials in recent history. The courtroom was quiet, but the tension was unmistakable. Stacks of digital evidence filled the prosecution and defense tables. Every frame of video would matter. Every second would be analyzed. At the center sat the defendant Kyle Rittenhouse, now facing multiple serious charges. Leading the prosecution was Thomas Binger. Representing the defense was Mark Richards. Presiding over the trial was Bruce Schroeder. From the beginning, it was clear this case would hinge on interpretation, not just facts. The prosecution argued that Rittenhouse had placed himself into a dangerous situation while armed, escalating the risk of violence. The defense argued something very different. They claimed the evidence showed repeated attempts by Rittenhouse to retreat and that each use of force occurred only after he believed he was in immediate danger. To understand the truth, investigators reconstructed the timeline using dozens of video sources, drone footage, live stream recordings, security cameras. Each angle added another layer. One video appeared to show Rittenhouse running across a parking lot. Then came testimony from Gage Grosskreutz, the surviving witness. His account became one of the most critical moments of the trial. When questioned, he described approaching Rittenhouse during the chaotic sequence. But under cross-examination, a key clarification emerged regarding the positioning of his own firearm. The courtroom grew still. This detail quickly became one of the most discussed elements of the entire case. Because now, the timeline wasn't just about movement, it was about perceived threat. Meanwhile, forensic analysts examined distances, trajectories, and audio timing. Experts explained how chaotic environments can distort perception. What feels like seconds can feel longer. What seems clear afterward may not feel clear in the moment. Both sides leaned heavily on this psychological factor. But another unexpected element intensified the debate. High-resolution drone footage surfaced, offering a previously unseen perspective of the initial encounter. The prosecution argued it supported their theory. The defense argued it supported theirs. Suddenly, the same piece of evidence was being interpreted in completely opposite ways. Public attention intensified. Media coverage expanded globally. Legal analysts debated every detail, and as closing arguments approached, one question remained unresolved. Would the jury interpret the evidence through the lens of self-defense or responsibility? The answer would soon determine the outcome. Closing arguments began with a sense of finality. Weeks of testimony had led to this moment. The prosecution carefully walked the jury through the timeline, emphasizing decision-making and risk. The defense focused on fear, movement, and the legal definition of self-defense. Every second of video was revisited. Every witness statement reframed, every interpretation sharpened. Judge Bruce Schroeder reminded the jury of their responsibility to evaluate only the evidence presented in court. Not public opinion, not media coverage, only the facts. The jury then began deliberations. Hours passed, then days. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered. Inside, the silence stretched. Legal experts noted how complex the case had become. Multiple videos, multiple perspectives, multiple interpretations. Self-defense law often depends on perception when a person reasonably believes in a fast-moving situation. And in this case, perception was everything. Finally, the jury returned. The courtroom stood still. The verdict was read. Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty on all counts. The reaction was immediate and divided. For some, the verdict reinforced the legal standard of self-defense. For others, it raised deeper questions about responsibility and public safety. Across the world, discussions followed. Legal scholars debated the interpretation of evidence. Commentators examined how digital footage is changing modern trials. Investigators reflected on how quickly chaotic events can become legal turning points. But perhaps the most lasting impact came from one realization. In an era where nearly every moment is recorded, truth is no longer just about what happened. It's about how it is understood, and in the courtroom, understanding can shape history. The case remains one of the most studied examples of how technology, perception, and law intersect in modern justice. Because sometimes, the most complex trials are not about a single moment, but about how many different ways that moment can be seen. If you thought this case was shocking, the next story is even more unexpected. Subscribe so you don't miss it.